Hey, good people. Here this week, we're going to be talking about community counseling and social justice. And before we get started and diving into some of this information, I just want to point something out to you, information that you may find helpful in the textbook. This textbook, in the beginning, it kind of gives us some very interesting questions that we can consider for ourselves. Excuse my dog as she expresses her opinion, that we can consider for ourselves as helping professionals in regards to how we may view the community that we reside in. How are we viewing the issues within the community and how that may impact us as a professional, but also from a personal perspective. So when we're thinking about community counseling, it is very important that we understand that community counseling is all about working with the community as our client. You know, when we talk about having clients all throughout the semester, we looked at individuals, we looked at families, looked at groups, and now we're looking at the community as our client. So when we're thinking about the community as our client, some of the things that we have to be mindful of would be the makeup of our community. And when I talk about the makeup of our community, it is very important that we recognize the members in our community and the diversity that resides or that is included in our community, so that as helping professionals, we are very mindful that we're working for the betterment of the whole. And again, looking at the community as our client, we're looking at how can we make our client whole. How can we work with specific members within our community and narrow our focus down as a helping professional, that we provide the correct information, the correct resources, and that we empower all members of the community. Sometimes when we think about empowering members of the community, this leads to what we get into when we talk about social justice and advocating for change and looking at things that are going on systematically that may it may impact how a client, consumer, or patient may view themselves, how they may receive services. And there are times where we, the worker, have to also check ourselves in regards to systematic changes and what may be helping and or hindering us from providing the appropriate services, or thorough services, I should say, for our client, consumer, or patient. So again, I want us to be mindful when we're talking about the community as our client, that we look at this from the perspective of how do we make the community whole? How do we do that? One thing that our book talks about when we're looking at making our community whole and working from a community counseling perspective, we look at a very comprehensive model, is what our book refers to. When we're talking about a comprehensive model, two activities are referenced in our textbook, and I really want you to pay attention to this. The first is facilitating human development by providing direct services with our clients and community members, and the second one is facilitating community development through advocacy and breaking down external barriers. So in essence, while we may have the community as our client consists of two parts: the human development as well as the community development. When we talk about the human development, we look at that from the perspective of direct client services versus indirect client services. Also, we look at direct community services and indirect community services. Our direct client services, these are going to be things that we look at, or information that our focus may be on, education, preventative education, looking at how do we provide the right type of resources for any particular population, segment of the population that may have felt disadvantaged, oppressed, that may be classified as a marginal population. So our direct client services, we're looking at providing some type of preventative education. We can see this in some of the things that may have been done throughout various communities. When we talk about domestic violence awareness, how are we bringing this information to the community as a whole? Sometimes we see that through walks, through community events, through educational events. When we look at indirect client services, again, we're looking at how can we create a partnership, so to speak, that would influence some type of policy, procedure, or services that are available to our clients, consumers, or patients. When we're looking at a particular population, through indirect client services as well as through direct client services, our main goal is always focusing on empowerment. How are we providing the right tools, the right information for our client, consumer, patient, the community right now would be our client, so that they feel empowered and able to make change happen for themselves. When we talk about direct community service again is looking at offering some type of educational programming, but we're offering it on a larger scale. When we talk about the larger scale educational programming, this is where we see, some of the workshops, some of the seminars, some of the interpersonal relationships that are formed between client and consumer. When we talk about direct community service and educational programming, one of the things that I used to participate in when first moving back here to Johnstown was working with the community health outreach office from the local hospital. And our goal at one point in time was to educate the African American community on prostate cancer in Black men and African American men. And I think I mentioned this in a previous lecture. When we talk about that direct community service, we're providing, again, educational information. When we talk about that indirect community service, this is where we're looking at having the opportunity, or at least creating the plan, creating discussion that's going to promote or at least initiate some type of systemic change, some type of change in public policy procedure as it impacts a very specific segment of our population. Okay, so as we move on and talking about community counseling and social justice, I want to bring in a little bit of information in regards to the social justice perspective from a community counseling, our community counselor role, I should say, excuse me. When we're looking at social justice is all about looking at how are we providing or ensuring equal access and equity of services for those who have systematically, as the definition says, systematically been excluded based on some very discriminatory or identifying characteristics, whether it be race, ethnicity, gender, age, mental, physical ability, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, something that is keeping a segment of the population from receiving full benefits or having that equity in services. And so when we're talking about this social justice perspective, the book gets into, and it just gives us a little bit of information about this fifth force paradigm, or this fifth force shift when we're looking at providing community counseling. Now, the book states the fifth force represents a proactive concern with advocacy and social change, and focuses on challenging systems and policies on multiple levels. From this perspective, the helping professional's role includes functioning as an advocate, a consultant, psychoeducator, change agent, and a community worker. With this fifth force, with this paradigm shift, we're looking at you, the community counselor, you, the change agent, functioning beyond just providing one-on-one therapeutic services. But now we're working with an entire system, if that makes sense. So again, we're talking about social justice perspective and how we see some of these things pan out as a helping professional. When we're looking at this from a helping professional's perspective, one of the things that's very important for us to understand is that although we may not choose to go into the social justice aspect of being a helping professional, it's important to recognize that our social justice advocacy is highlighted several times in several ethical codes from our helping professions. In your textbook, you have information and example coming from the NASW. There's probably, or I should say, I'm sure there's the same information that comes under the ACA, that comes under APA. So I encourage you to look at some of those ethical codes and look at their policy under social justice advocacy. When we're looking at, again, social justice advocacy, it's all about the main goal is all about empowerment, empowerment, empowerment. As helping professionals, that is always what we're trying to do for our clients, consumers, or patients, is uplift them, but also provide for them the resources and the tools that they need to feel as though that they have decisions to make, that they have abilities to be successful, where in one instance they were feeling unsuccessful. So the goals of social justice and advocacy are all focused around empowerment. How can we build people up and empower them to move away from being seen as or functioning as an oppressed group, a marginalized group, and functioning with the sense of urgency and taking back some of that, the power, and having very realistic goals in and of themselves or for themselves. Again, as we continue on and looking at social advocacy, social justice and advocacy, some of the issues that that we address as helping professionals is something that is discussed. Should you take a general psychology course, as it is discussed in Intro to Social Work course, this whole idea of self-actualization, getting to the point, and this is part of Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of need, getting to the place where I have made it through and I have made concessions through some of these needs, what Maslow refers to as D needs, deficient needs. Areas in my life that I have felt that I was not able to get those needs met successfully. Well, now that I have worked through those deficient needs, I get to this being need, B-E-I-N-G, being, meaning that I am at this place of self-actualization and I recognize within myself the tools, the courage, the information, and the positions that I need to take in order to make change happen for my benefit. So again, when we're talking about that social justice advocacy, it's all about empowerment and self-actualization for our client, consumer, or patient. Advocacy competencies. For you, the helping professional, some of the things that you have to be mindful of when we're talking about working as an advocate is you must be mindful of multicultural competencies. We have to know that everything that we may value, believe in, that we may hold near and dear is not the same across the board for everyone that we will come into contact with. Now, we had a nice chapter on multicultural work, I should say ethics and multicultural counseling. But again, let me go back, just to reiterate that when we're talking about the competencies as an advocate, you first have to have the foundation of your education and a theoretical base, but then also looking at multiculturally, where are you? What are your thoughts? What are your perspectives? And how well are you receiving those from the community in which you'll be working with? When we talk about the idea of working within the community, this is where we recognize our various roles, I should say the positions and the roles. The position would be what we are doing or what we're serving in. The role is the expectation of our behavior. When we talk about outreach interventions, this is where you, the worker, are not sitting behind the desk, but you're doing some work within the community. You are creating educational programming. You're creating some type of programming and effort to be out in the community to work with your clients, consumers, and patients, and making sure that we're trying to address the needs that they have, not the needs that we think they have. But outreach means that we're going out into the community, we are talking with the community members, and we are we're forming and implementing a plan that's going to be beneficial for them. When we talk about other roles that you may function in or other positions that you may function in, and these may be some names that you may see being advertised in the classifieds. Don't run from them, good people. Know that you have the foundation to function according to some of these positions as a consultant, as an advisor, to facilitate support groups, to facilitate healing groups. Now, these different roles that you function in, of course, have different expectations. As a consultant, you're going to be kind of seen as an encourager and a teacher. As an advisor, you're going to be the one who is looking at the person in the environment, some of the issues that your client, consumer, or patient may be going through, and providing direction based on your assessment within of that person in their environment. Facilitating support systems, we're looking at, the book refers to it as indigenous support systems, where we're talking about our families and our friends, that circle of trust, good people. Sometimes you may be called upon to help facilitate a meeting with that circle of trust. Sometimes we see these meetings come about as interventions. If we have someone that is dealing with whether it be substance abuse, whether it be mental health, whether it be behavioral problem, sometimes we see it referred to as interventions, but you're functioning as a facilitator of that support group. When we talk about a facilitator of a healing system, we're looking at you, the helping professional, working with some of our paraprofessionals in the field that our book refers to them as indigenous, if I could say that, healing systems, which would be like our religious leaders, our community leaders, some of the folks who may not have a degree per se in uh, the helping profession, but they have the experience and they have the trust of those who are within the community that they live in. So those are these roles here that are listed here: your advocate, your change agent, your consultant, your advisor, your facilitator of support systems, facilitator of healing systems. Now, as we talk about um, working with and promoting change within the community, excuse me, we want to make sure that there is a clear understanding about how we go about doing this change in the community. So when we talk about change within the community and we look at it from this developmental perspective or developmental approach, developmental versus service. When we're talking about the developmental approach is all about looking at our assets within the community, looking at our capabilities and identifying the resources and individuals within our community that we would be able to lean on, that we would be able to trust that they would have buy-in into some of the changes that need to take place. Some of these things are referred to as human capital, environmental capital. We're looking at religious capital coming from the faith-based community, looking at our resource capital. How can we ensure some type of buy-in from all of these areas into seeing change take place within our community? And the opposite of that would be our service approach. The service approach is looking at how are we identifying problems and how are we trying to solve the problem, how are we trying to fix the problem. When we're looking at this service approach, um, it does rely a lot on the information from an expert, and the imbalance is that there's not a lot of shared responsibility or shared power by all of the people that are involved in wanting to see change happen. So some of the things that we have to be mindful of when we're talking about wanting to see change happen is, I'm going to, I went too far, is when we talk about working within a system, we want to make sure that as we are working within the system, first of all, that we respect the system that is currently in place, respect the system, and working that we, or I should say, when we respect the system, we're working that we, first of all, that we clearly define our roles. We look at the opportunities that are presented before us. We look at how the system is organized. We try to form collaborative partnerships, collaborative relationships. This is key, good people, when we're talking about looking to make change happen and working within the community as our client. We want to make sure that we have a nice collaborative relationship with people that are already in place, with key stakeholders, with change agents that are already out here making things happen. We have to be able to identify key stakeholders. Our key stakeholders are not just people who are working in the helping profession or the mental health profession, but key stakeholders could include some of our politicians. It includes local leaders. It includes community leaders. It includes grandma who sits on her front porch in the summertime and she's watching all of this stuff go on. It includes the mailman who, or I should say mail carrier, excuse me, who on their beat, they notice the negative things. They notice the changes that could be made in the community, but they don't know where to begin. So when we're talking about making change happen and working within the community, we have to know that it's all about a system approach. How do we make or how do we help the community, I should say, heal itself based on what already is in existence, the system that is functioning, but also making sure that we address individual needs as well as community needs, bringing it together so that as the community begins to identify a plan, as you, the change agent, you, the mobilizer, you, the facilitator, as you identify the things that need to be done and you and the community make a plan, implementation would be smooth sailing. Well, I shouldn't say smooth sailing. It'll come out a lot easier because you'll have the collaboration in place. All right, so this is just brief overview of the chapter on community counseling and social justice. Please make sure that you read the chapter in its entirety. Please make sure you do not overlook the case studies that are in the chapter because it is very good information, and it kind of gives you the idea of what to expect in an application type situation based on the information covered in the chapter. All right, good people, that is the close of this chapter. There is a discussion post available for you. There is also the chapter exam. So by all means, please make sure that you take the opportunity to read the chapter before completing either of those. And also there should be a chapter assignment in the folder for you. Excuse me. That was the goldfish in me choking on air. So if you have any questions or concerns, contact me by email or you can call me on my office phone. All right, y'all. Love, peace, and soul. I will catch you on the flip side.